Hello everyone, it's Cactus, and if you haven't seen already, that last night Nintendo dropped some patch notes for Splatoon 3 that is going to be releasing today on March 30th, so we're going to go over those patch notes now. The first thing they mentioned is changes to the DLC, added some data relating to the Inkopolis during Splatfest. Changes to Splatfest, added a song that will play during Splatfest battles and Tricolor Turf Wars. The song will be played whether or not the player has downloaded the DLC. This might be that new song that was released with the Squid Sisters X Big Man, which was a really good song. I really enjoyed it, so I'm sure that's the song that they're going to be playing. Adjustment to the points awarded for each category during the Splatfest final results. So this is all the before and afters. It looks like they lowered the sneak peek by 1, lowered the percent of votes by 2, raised the tricolor battle by 3, and that's pretty much it. The open and pro stayed the same, so it looks like they made it more efficient of winning through the tricolor battles versus the early onset categories. Now the stuff that everybody wants to look at. The changes to multiplayer. Specifications for some main weapon changes. Splattershot Nova. Movement speed while firing is now about 10% faster. Ink splatter will now fall around the player's feet more easily. This makes it a lot easier to move around with this weapon. After all, the Nova isn't really played much anyway. It is considered the long-range arrow spray of the game, so it's nice to see that they tried to buff it a little bit, so it'll be interesting to see the changes this makes to maybe players playing this weapon a little bit more frequently. The Luna Blaster and Lunar Blaster Neo increase the radius of the explosion area that deals 70 damage by about 50%. No changes to the radius of the area that deals 50% of damage. So usually this means about the distance you're away from the player. The 70% first hit marker, which is usually the direct, the radius of it is 50% larger. This actually, to me, is very interesting to see because, you know, the Lunar Blaster is a pretty good weapon, and I think we're going to see a lot more play in the competitive scene from Lunar Blasters considering this buff it got. The Big Swig Roller adjusted the damage fall-off rate based on vertical swing distance, making the amount of damage fall off more gradually than before. Due to this change, the distance where 100 plus damage can be dealt was extended by roughly 15%, and the distance where 50 plus damage can be dealt was extended by roughly 49%. Interesting. So let's see. They adjusted the damage fall-off rate based on the vertical swing. So I guess the ink's going to be a lot more catered to fall-off damage. Obviously, it's pretty much what it's saying. They extended the distance, which is pretty nice because Big Swig kind of doesn't hit for a lot with its swings, and they've been kind of buffing it. They even buffed it in the pretty sure the last update as well. So Big Swig is having a little bit more done to it. The Sniper 5H maximum damage has been increased from 60 to 68. Sniper might actually be a little more playable now. I know a lot of players were in love with the weapon when it first dropped, but then dropped it quickly after when they realized it's not a very viable weapon. But now, with a 8-point damage increase, might this be enough to make the Snipe Rider more playable? We'll have to see. Slosher and Slosher Deco adjusted the damage fall-off rate when a player attacks someone vertically lower than them, making it more difficult for damage to decrease. Due to this change, the minimum amount of damage dealt to an opponent will be 50%. Slosher might be making its way into the high-level comp scene. All I'm saying, I'm gonna predicting it. I'm saying it. I could be horribly wrong, but you know, Slosher Deco are getting more viable the way they do these patches to the weapons. I'm really intrigued and interested in to see how players are going to use this to their advantage. I mean, 50% damage is a lot. 50 points. That's literally half of your health. So it's and especially if you match it with now the fall-off damage, I think we might be seeing Sloshers a lot more. The Mini Splatling and the Zinc Mini Splatling increased fire duration by roughly 70%, so it's going to shoot just a little bit longer. Which, I mean, they did that to, I believe, the Nautilus in the last patch, if I remember correctly. So that's interesting to see. Or was it Ballpoint? I knew it was one of those two. It was another quick-moving Splatling. The Dapple Dualies and the Dapple Dualies Nouveau shorten the amount of time it takes for a player to be able to act after a dodge roll by roughly 0.06%. So roughly a little more than half a second. you are able to act more on the dodge roll, so you won't be stuck for as long. Very interesting to see, very interesting. The Splat Dualies. Increase the dodge roll movement speed, shortening the amount of time it takes to move by roughly 0.06 as well. The Reflux 450 made the angle of diffusion narrower depending on the amount of charge, making it easier to focus on attacking a single area. Movement speed while charging is now about 10% faster. Interesting. So you'll be able to move a lot quicker while you have used charge. You won't be as slow as probably like, let's say, an E-liter when it has a full charge. It kind of just wiggles to the side, and now you won't have to just wiggle. You'll be able to move a little faster. The sub-weapon classes that got changed are Angle Shooter and Burst Bomb. Angle Shooter roughly doubled the radius of the ink splatter that occurs when it hits terrain. They did this in the previous patch. They did the exact same thing. So now, when your Angle Shooter hits a wall or the floor, it's going to have a lot more paint on the ground, which is very interesting. I'm curious to see if they're going to do it again in the following patch, because that's a lot. That's going to be a lot. And considering that if you just need that one little patch of ink there to maybe even just get up on the wall, or even just try to avoid or stop a player from shifting towards that wall and maybe a map like Flounder Heights, you're going to make it very difficult for them. Burst Bomb. This is the beginning of the Splash. This is the beginning of the fall of Splash. Increase the amount of ink consumed from a standard ink tank from 40 to 45% if the player doesn't have the Ink Saver Sub ability equipped. The amount of ink consumed when the maximum number of abilities are equipped will not change. So if you are not running Ink Saver Sub, be prepared to lose more ink for your use of a Burst Bomb. Now, before it was 40-40, that leaves you with 20% ink left to fire, which is roughly enough to be able to pick off a player or two after you already threw 2 Burst Bombs to maybe paint their feet. But now you have to be extremely more cautious with how you use your Burst Bombs, or do what the patch says and use Ink Saver Sub, which is going to change a lot of players' builds right now in the competitive scene. This is depending, of course, if they think it is warranted to. Personally, I'm not too sure how I feel about it. I was talking with a friend of mine in the competitive scene who believed that maybe an option is to run maybe 2 Ink Saver Subs. It's possible, it might be viable, we're not sure yet. It's going to be interesting to see. I know I'm personally going to check out sendu.ink right after, maybe about a week after this patch, just to see what players are kind of cooking up with their gear. I'll make sure to link sendu.ink down in the description below. It's a very helpful website. Many players use it all the time to share their builds and what they use for certain mapping modes. The special weapons. Ink Vac. Increase the radius of the outer perimeter where vacuuming up ink by roughly 10% to cover a larger area than before. So it's going to make it a lot harder now to shoot over or around or from the sides of an Ink Vac user. Now, this is interesting because as someone myself who has gotten actually a lot of picks on players using the weapon, or sorry, the special weapon, I've used it a lot by going around the players. It's going to be interesting to see how much this 10% might actually cover. I'm thinking maybe it might not be enough. I think there's going to be still ways around it. If you're, of course, you're able to get behind a player in general, it's going to be a lot better of a time. Tacticooler. Increase the initial setup speed when throwing the Tacticooler roughly 33% to enable it to be set up farther than before. So you're going to be able to really launch that Tacticooler. Roughly double the horizontal radius of the area where players can drink a beverage. So you can be twice away? Twice the distance? Yeah, you could be twice the distance away than you were before to get a drink from the cooler, which is interesting because that's going to be very helpful, that a player could just kind of zip right by the cooler rather than having to go directly towards it to get a drink, which is very nice. Reef Slider. Increase the amount of damage dealt from 60 to 70% when getting caught in an explosion at long range, and increase the radius of that area by roughly 17%. So a larger hit radius and deals to 10% more damage. Increase the radius of the ink splatter from an explosion by roughly 21%. So it's going to be able to put a lot more paint on the ground. The Ink Jet. Increase the radius of the explosion area that deals 50% damage by roughly 43%. No changes to the radius of the area that deals 30%. So more direct hits are going to do sorry, the direct radius of the explosion that does 50 damage is enlarged, which is very cool. It's very nice. It's actually going to be probably very helpful. Actually, it's probably going to be a little frustrating too, because on Inkjet already you had to have a lot of really spot-on accuracy. This kind of shortens up a little bit, and you're almost guaranteed a lot more direct 50% damage. I'm going to have to test that out in the training room when the patch drops. I really want to see the difference in that. Strengthened the jet of ink that comes out when pressing B, enabling players to jump higher than before. Interesting. That was something that a lot of players I remember seeing in the community would like to see, was that you can actually go a lot higher, because sometimes it's useful to get over certain ledges. So it's going to be interesting to see how this affects a lot of inkjet plays on certain maps. The Ultra Stamp. Increase the radius of the area where a player can be damaged from the shockwaves of continuous stamp attacks by roughly 43%, so it's got a larger hitbox now. Improves the turning performance when doing continuous stamp attacks, making it easier to change direction. Wow, Stamp is really getting buffed here. When doing continuous stamp attacks, the stamp will now be displayed as translucent on the user screen, making it easier for them to see where they are going. Wow! Ultra Stamp becoming viable in the competitive scene? I'm excited to see that. As someone who doesn't see a lot of Stamp, I don't use it. I'm really bad with it. I'm gonna be honest. I'm really bad with Stamp. This is interesting. This is interesting to see. This is interesting. I'm curious to see how players are gonna take advantage of this. Especially, again, this translucent part. It's gonna be super easier to see. Like, if a player's to your right, you're just gonna be able to turn around and just take care of them. The moment we've all been waiting for. Crab Tank. Introduced an interval where a player cannot attack for roughly 0.33, that's a third of a second, after returning to attack mode from mobile mode. For those who don't know, mobile mode is when you go into a ball in the crab form, and of course attacking mode is when you're able to shoot and fire. So a third of a second, you cannot attack. I don't think that's enough to stop Crab Tank from being meta, but it's a start. And it's a start a lot of people are happy with, because it's a point in the right direction to removing the triple splash meta. Increase the amount of time it takes for players to act again after the special ends. They don't tell you how much, though. They don't tell you how much. My theory that I've been telling a lot of my fellow competitive players is that it's turning into Reflighter, where you're paused for a second before you can actually start moving. Now, it makes sense for the splash to not be able to really move too much, especially since you have to be more... Because when you play Splash with Crab, you're a lot more mobile and you're a lot more up front in the action of the fights whenever you're playing a map, replaying a mode. So this kind of change is very interesting, because what about the weapons like the Splattershot Pro that also have Crab Tank? I mean, that weapon usually uses it a lot further away. I know this is mainly to attack Splash, but also technically the dualies, the Splat dualies, because I know they also have Crab Tank. So it's going to be interesting to see how exactly much of a difference it is before you can actually move and do anything after the special ends. As someone who is a Splash main myself, you know, this is intriguing. I'm curious to see how this works. Kraken Royale. This is incredible. I'm so glad they did this. Not the first part, the second part. Made it easier for a player to be pushed back by an enemy attack on tower control mode when the player is on the tower. The Kraken cheese for tower control was horrible. You literally were on tower and you couldn't do anything if there was a Kraken on it. Made it so that players will drop their clams and power clams wherever they are when they use this special in Clam Blitz mode. That is perfect. That is fantastic. We would always say that when the Kraken came out, this mode became quite literally impossible to win if there was a Kraken on the other team and if the player knew how to use Kraken properly, which a lot of players have learned to do already. They would just kind of camp by the basket with the power clam and you couldn't do anything about it. Some gear changes. Sub resistance up. Damage from burst bombs and fizzy bombs will be reduced more than before, sorry. Even with just a few gear abilities, the damage reduction from equipping the maximum gear abilities will not change. So sub resistance up. It's useful again. It's useful now. Use it. I usually run at least one. Use it. Opening Gambit. Now, this is a curious one because I've even heard my friend told me that FLC has been saying that Opening Gambit might be viable to run again. I haven't personally listened to the Twitch streams where he announced it, but I'm sure it's along those lines of, hey, you can start using Opening Gambit. It's going to be more useful, and here's why. If a player splats or assists in splatting an enemy while this gear ability is in effect, which again, Opening Gambit is in effect for the first 30 seconds of a match, the effect will now be extended by roughly 15 seconds instead of roughly 7.5. Made it so that the Intensify Action gear ability will also occur when this gear ability is in effect. So now you will also, if you're running Opening Gambit, you will be able to Squid Surge and Squid Roll a lot easier as well. The effect is equivalent to 3 primary gear abilities. I want you to think about that for a second. If you start the game and you're running Opening Gambit and you get a wipeout, that is a whole minute extra of Opening Gambit you get, which is crazy. It's crazy. Not even have to get, don't even have to get a wipe in yourself. Like, you can assist in one and get 3 other splats. You know what I mean? Like, it's Opening Gambit is now probably going to see a lot more use. I mean, I don't know how much more use, but more than before. Points for special weapons. Carbon Roller Deco. It is from 200 to 190. 96 Gal, 200 to 210. A little bit harder to get cracking now with 96 Gal, but honestly, it's understandable. Most builds with the 96 run special charges anyway, so it's honestly, it's deserved. We have changes to Salmon Run. Made the interval between touching a golden egg being able to use it roughly the same for all players by adjusting the animation speed when a golden egg goes into a non-host player's life ring. The interval between touching a golden egg and being able to use it now roughly the same for the host and non-host players. The sound effects for an opponent's Kraken Royale are now easier to hear from a distance. That's nice. Now you can hear a lot easier, just like with the Zuka, the Ink Zuka. You used to not be able to hear it a lot. Now you have an easier time hearing it. I'm glad it did the same effect with the Kraken Royale. Now, there are changes to Salmon Run. There are a couple bug fixes. There are multiplayer fixes. A lot of these I'm not really going to go over too much. Here's, of course, the previous patches. I mainly wanted to focus this video on the main weapons, sub-weapons, special weapons, and of course the abilities, just because these are honestly the main factors about the game itself. I mean, looking at some of these bug fixes, some interesting changes to Salmon Run overall, some bug fixes to player controls, nothing too crazy here on itself. Multiplayer, they just fixed a couple issues with like clams, looks like Rainmaker, a lot of them getting unintended spaces, so a couple of bug fixes that maybe were noticed before by the community, and Nintendo was able to catch on to it. So with that being said, that's going to do it for this video on the patch notes. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below what you think about this version 3.1 update coming today, later tonight, most likely tonight, for Splatoon 3. And I'll see all of you in the next video.